Tell me about Private Peaceful, where the idea came from.
Private Peaceful is a book by Michael Morpurgo, and the idea completely came from reading the book and discovering that it was a First World War story, and it was set in Devon, and it was a rite of passage story, and it just had so much inherent drama that we had to make it into a movie.
And it wasn't a movie first of all, was it? Because it's been a stage play as well, is that right?
Yeah, it's been through lots of incarnations. It started as a novel, it then became a one-man play for the theatre. It then has become a 30-man play for kind of youth theatres and things like that. It's also been a radio play for the BBC, and then finally it's made it onto the big screen.
What are the kind of things you have to take into account when you're adapting a novel for screen as opposed to the stage?
Well, of course, on the screen you're telling a visual story, and you don't need as much dialogue, and you don't need to ask the audience to come up with things in their mind's eye. They can actually see it before you. You've got the wonderful thing of being able to cast as many people as you want, and to cast extras and all the rest of it, so you can have a cast of thousands.
And as well as being a writer, you're a producer on this particular project, weren't you? What was that like? I mean, how did that compare to just being a writer on the film?
Oh, I'd have loved to have just been a writer on the film. The luxury of just sort of sitting in your garret and writing a screenplay, and then the thrill of coming along to one day perhaps on location and that sort of thing would have been wonderful. But as a producer, I did very rarely have had any time to sit back and actually enjoy the fact that I've had a screenplay made, which is quite a rare thing in Britain. You spend all the time writing and never seeing them getting made. But of course, the other thing about being a producer is what was exciting meant that I was actually in control with Guy Deboja, my fellow producer. We held the purse strings, we could make lots of decisions, and we could work collaboratively with the director in a way that perhaps as a screenplay writer I wouldn't have quite had as much power.
You mentioned locations there, and I know that part of the film is set in Devon, isn't it? But you didn't actually film in Devon, did you? You actually filmed in Suffolk and Ipswich in particular, around that area. Tell us about where you decided to film and why.
Well, we were intending to shoot in Devon, and in fact in the very village in which the story is set, which is Iddesleigh, which is where Michael Morpurgo lives and where he writes all his stories. But when we went to see a First World War trench system that had been recreated in a field on the outskirts of Ipswich, we thought, we could not only shoot the First World War here, but we could actually film in all the villages around and all the fields all around, all the stuff that happens in Devon, because although it's Suffolk, it isn't as flat as everyone thinks it is, and also it's very unspoilt, and a lot of places haven't changed for 100 years, so that was great. There are a lot of shops, there are a lot of houses, there are a lot of hedgerows that are the same as they were 100 years ago, and it hasn't been over-filmed, so it's not familiar from TV series and things like that. So that's how we ended up in that part of the world, because obviously when you're making a film, it's better to be in one place all the time rather than to split your locations.
Did it have any effect on you, the fact that obviously War Horse, another novel by Michael, has come out and been a big budget film, hasn't it, with Spielberg? How far along the line was Private Peaceful at that stage, and has that been a positive or a negative thing, do you think?
Well, I think it can only be a positive thing. What was really exciting for us and for Michael is that we were already very far down the line with Private Peaceful before Steven Spielberg had even seen War Horse in the West End or had read the book or thought about doing the film. The moment that he was on board, obviously, with War Horse, is that for us, more investors became attracted. They thought, this Michael Morpurgo does have some cachet in the film world. It opens up territories all around the world that wouldn't necessarily have heard of Michael Morpurgo because he hasn't been translated there before, but they will have heard of Spielberg for obvious reasons. So it really helped. The two films, though, although they're based in the same part of the world and they're both First World War stories, couldn't be more different, and they're shot differently and they're made differently, and I'm sure Stephen is as pleased for us as we were pleased for him.
The actors in the film are at different ages, aren't they? You have the very young leads, there's two young lads who are brothers and a young girl, and then you have the older versions of them who do go off to war. Tell us about casting those actors for Private Peaceful.
Well, it was very important, I think, to show the young children before they grow up and then go off to war. And in fact, it's the two boys and Molly, but also their pals as well. And we wanted to show that because we actually wanted to see people growing up from being these little toddlers into being people that then are going to get shot down on the battlefields of Flanders. In terms of casting the doubles, our instruction to the director and the casting director was, don't worry about the match. Get the best young Tomo and the best Tomo you can, and then we'll worry about whether or not they don't look alike later. And there was actually, what was brilliant is there's very little we needed to do. I think Izzy and who plays young Molly, and Alex who plays the older Molly, I think they kind of coordinated hair colour. Probably somebody wore contact lenses at one point, so they had the same colour eyes as their older or younger self. But other than that, it just genuinely came out of getting the best actors for the young roles and their older selves.
Is there a message in Private Peaceful? I mean, it's only been quite recently, hasn't it, that there's actually been a pardon for some of the soldiers who were actually shot during the First World War.
Yes, I mean, when we did because I worked on the theatre play as well, that I think had some small part in bringing about that pardon, because England, Britain was one of the last states in the world to actually grant posthumous pardons to the people who were shot, for many of them for cowardice or for having shell shock in the First World War, whereas other countries, more civilized countries, had done it beforehand, like France and New Zealand in particular. But of course, the message of any film is what people take away from it. But we did. There's a political message in a war film, and there's an anger in this kind of story, and there's also hopefully a fun and entertainment, and actually make people feel better about themselves and about the world at the end.
And what's next for you now, Simon?
For me, I'm working on Private Peaceful, the one-man show, which we're reviving at the Haymarket. I'm working on other Michael Morpurgo projects, and with Guy, my fellow producer, we've got a big slate of films that now, on the back of Private Peaceful, we'll be able to put into production.